I found this clip. Um,
Looks like some of the river rafting going down the Kaweah River.
yes.
And that yellow area is actually what is the East Kaweah Groundwater Sustainability Agency, actually, it looks like.
Okay.
So there's 3 groundwater sustainability agencies in the Kaweah Subbasin, the Mid-Kaweah, which I manage, the Greater Kaweah, which is managed by Mark Larson, and then the East Kaweah, which is managed by Mike Hagman. So there's 3 GSAs.
Share with us more about the watershed that is feeding the Kaweah region.
It's the Kaweah watershed in the Sierra Nevadas, and it's it's south of the Kings watershed, north of the Tule watershed, and where it's a watershed that feeds Lake Kaweah, which is a 185,000 acre foot reservoir, um, operated by the Army Corps of Engineers, and that watershed used to, it's one of the steepest watersheds in the U.S. So the water comes off very fast, and it used to feed a delta, that what they called the Kaweah Delta, which was streams and creeks that used to fan out in that upper watershed area. And over time, we've channelized some of those for irrigation and flood control reasons. The subbasin is also supplemented by the Frank Kern Canal system. So we do receive a significant amount of Bureau Reclamation water off the Frank Kern Canal. There's several CVP districts. Tulare Irrigation District, the district I manage, is one of the largest CVP contractors in the subbasin, but we also have Lindmore Irrigation District, Lindsay Strathmore Irrigation District, Exeter Irrigation District, Ivanhoe Irrigation District, Stone Corral Irrigation District, and then Kaweah Delta Water Conservation District has a small CVP contract. So that's kind of and the watershed is about 400, or the subbasin is 441,000 acres fed by the watershed, largely agriculture, but also some municipalities like the city of Visalia and the city of Tulare. They are groundwater dependent. However, we are not pumping groundwater anymore. We're pumping surface water that gets put in the groundwater, so in the groundwater system. So the 2 cities that rely upon surface water percolation for their municipal demand, and the two largest cities, Visalia and Tulare, are GSA partners with Tulare Irrigation District in the Mid-Kaweah GSA.
Tell me a little bit more about the composition, the demographics of the farming community in terms of the size of the farms, the corporate aspect of it, maybe the cropping patterns and the cropping systems. And if you don't mind, think back at before 2010, and what was the landscape like then, and then what it's like these days.
So across the 441,000 acres, yeah, you're right. There's a east to west kind of pattern. On the east side, up against the foothills, is largely our citrus territory, oranges, lemons, tangerines. So that's the main cropping pattern on the eastern third of the basin. The middle third of the basin is more a blend of citrus, walnuts, and some vines. And then on the western third of the basin, which is where I manage with the Mid-Kaweah and Tulare Irrigation District, is largely dairy and nut crop territory. So large dairies probably dominate 2/3 of the landscape, and then the other third of that western third is probably nut crops, walnuts, pistachios, and almonds. And so that's kind of what the makeup has been. And prior to 2010, that's kind of what it was. And we were farmed pretty much wall to wall. Every acre was going to be covered with something. So let's fast forward to today and the current regulatory pressures and commodity price pressures that are on agriculture right now, labor, pesticide regulation, all those other things. Um, the east side is still mainly citrus. I think in the drought, the first drought from 2012 to 2014, several citrus growers took the opportunity where they had old orange groves that were slowing down on production, that they took those out and replanted those. So we had a large period there where the young trees were coming up to production. And that's a good thing, right? So if you take an old tree out that's using a lot of water, put a little tree in, it uses a little bit of water. So there was some water gains there. And then what we're seeing on the west side is our subbasin implemented groundwater allocations and a groundwater cap back in we've had it in place for about 3 years now. And so what we're seeing is that growers are planting or utilizing their ground based on what water supply they have. And so we are seeing we're seeing fallowing going on, or what I call smart fallowing, meaning if they have the groundwater credits available to farm, they will plant. If they don't have it, they let the ground rest, and they'll build up credits until they can farm. So we're seeing fallowing. Commodity prices and some of the nut crops like walnuts have really hit a rock bottom, and so most of our walnut growers are taking their trees out right now. Some almonds have come out, but what we're seeing is our evapotranspiration numbers going down, meaning there's less growing going on in the subbasin.
Yes, one of the transitions that take place when you move from a annual cropping system with rotations that allow for following, like what we do here in Yolo County for 100 years, has been a row crop system where Yolo has had a significant increase in acreage converted to perennials, almonds and pistachios, but mostly almonds, walnuts, not so much, but vineyards up in the Donegal Hills, but also olives. There's a very large Australian company that has found a land that actually was historic non-irrigated land, and they have planted thousands of acres of olives, all dependent on groundwater, with a significant impact on the aquifers that are there, impacting the rural communities. The city of Zamora lost water several years ago from their wells. And I wanted to mention that it seems like when you bring the almonds, and you mentioned that there's been a switch to almond as well, you now have a perennial crop that then needs to be watered, and then it hardens the demand for groundwater. How are you thinking about that, or what have you been able to assess in terms of that transformation?
And I forgot to answer one of your questions, like what are the size of the growers? So I can't speak to the entire subbasin because I don't know the entire subbasin, but in my irrigation district, the average size of the grower is 300 acres. So that's a small farmer to me. So we're still a small family farm region. As far as the perennial demand, the hardened demand, you're absolutely right. You can't not water those trees, right? They're going to die. And through our allocation system and the work that we've done, we've also developed a water marketing strategy and a transfer system, so that what we're finding is that growers that have the hardened demand can partner with growers that don't have a hardened demand, right? So if I have 100 acres of almonds that have a hard demand of 3 acre feet per acre, and I only allocated 2.5 acre feet per acre, they're short by a half an acre foot per acre. They go to their neighbor and say, hey, I need to lease this ground from you to pick up that 6 inches of of water to finish my crop off. So I'm going to fallow out, 20 acres of ground next to me. So there's no pumping there. So it's a mass balance that's going on. So we've created the tools and the tools and the instructions for folks to live within the confinement of an allocation, put it that way. And we've incentivized people through that, actually, meaning when we started it, it looked like a regulation, a cutback. And then what that ended up being is an incentive tool. So in 2023, when it turned wet, folks used that same program that was a cutback to increase their groundwater recharge. So even that guy growing the fixed crop, the almonds, could do some on-farm recharge and boost his credits up and use that in a future year. So again, in 2023, when there was a lot of flooding going on around in our region and people were worried about housing flooding and stuff like that, if you came to my bubble, my world, nothing was flooding. We were taking that water and putting it in the ground. We didn't overtop one ditch, and we imported more water than we ever have historically in the 145 years of our history. So
Yes.
I think that
Yes.
we've set up tools and mechanisms to manage around the fixed crop demand.
It's fascinating that you're there already, that you've been able to put in place over the last several years. And
I want to make sure your listeners understand how that's a testament to the quality and the fortitude of the growers that I work with.
yes.
They understood that we didn't have time, right? So there's a lot of conversation about having 20 years to solve SGMA.
Mm.
And we felt that that was a false narrative. And we felt you only had 4 years to solve it.
Mm.
And everybody, I remember I was probably at one of those UC Davis conferences, and I said, you only have 4 years to solve it. And somebody said, what are you talking about, Aaron? No, 2040 is sustainability. You're misleading people. 4 years? Where did you get 4 years? I said, there's going to be 4 wet years in that 20-year cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not prepared for one of those wet years, you're never going to make it.
Yes.
And so the growers that I work with understood that we only had 4 years, and we didn't know when one of those 4 years was going to come.
Yes.
So I was fortunate enough to have a conversation with my growers. They agreed. We went out on this leap of faith that we need to do these allocations. We need to do it. And I'm going to be very honest. We didn't know if it would work or not. We're not so brazen to think that the way we're doing it is right. Even we just agreed that we needed to do something, right? And let's get that started. And it worked beautifully, right? And we still have issues. Don't get me wrong,
of course.
But we're seeing groundwater levels come back. Everybody's at least working within the framework. We have a well mitigation process underway. Now, conditions
Yes.
could flip flop on us tomorrow. I mean, we could turn dry,
But
I'm
you
hoping
do
we've got
have
the tools ready.
you actually have a model in place, and I think that's where the 4 years come to be. That it takes 4 years or more to be ready, to put in place what you know that is needed in order to be ready for when is needed and beyond. Um, I showed you earlier this graph that starts in 1999 and runs through 2022.
Yep.
And when you look at that graph, you say, wow, that's tough. That is an amazing overpumping of
Yep.
this
Yep.
basin. And you obviously have the colors, and you see that, like you said, there's 4 years where one of them is wet, the rest of them are dry or below normal. And you need to be able to, in fact, California as a state and many regions found themselves unprepared in 2023 when the big storms came, they didn't know what to do with the water. And the state was scrambling with special dispensations, and now we need to figure out special permits so that Yolo County can get some water from here to there. By the time that they had the legislation and all that, we were already in May of 2023.
Yeah.
And so all that water ended up not getting where it needed to be.
Yep. Yeah. Ricardo, we again, you remember in November 2022, the big conversation out there by the weather forecasters that were El Nino 50% greater chance that it's going to be dry. That narrative didn't change until December 10th or something in that time period when they said, hey, there's an atmospheric river coming. And then we just got hammered over Christmas, and then we opened a flood release on the Kaweah River system, and the CVP I think started not too long after that during Christmas. We opened our phone lines in January. We said, hey, we're going to start a flood release. Anybody that wants to take water, take water. Typically, we would get a handful of people that take water in January. We had within 24 hours, we had a little over 100 turnouts on in the district, and it just went up from there. And Ricardo, I can't explain to you what it felt like to see growers. I mean, they all banded together. It was a nightmare, Ricardo. There's a reason why we historically didn't put water out in the wintertime, because when you run an irrigation system in the wintertime, it's a mess and it can be dangerous, right? It's wet out there, ground doesn't want to take water. It's saturated already. But these farmers, these guys and gals went out there all night long, put water out. We had it everywhere. Everywhere you drove, you would see everybody doing a little bit. So if everybody does a little bit, you can accomplish a lot. Yeah.
One of the things that I find especially important in your work and with your growers is that they agreed to a system of check and balances. They said, okay, we're now going to be part of the solution. We're pumping, we need to pump, we're growing, we have an economy, but we know that we can actually do part of the supply side. And in this case, you're working with allocations. And maybe you want to share a little bit about what that is, how it works, just for the context of it. But the idea that folks already know that for them, letting water into their property is going to give them credits. And so the incentive is there for them to participate and be active. And please share more about that.
Yeah, if there's one thing I've heard around the state is there's a hesitancy to do this on-farm recharge because there's no intrinsic, from the landowner's perspective, benefit. And that's not why we did ours. When we started our, I think every groundwater sustainability plan in 2020 said we're going to go build a whole bunch of projects and recharge our way into sustainability. I'm sorry. And then we submitted our GSPs in 2020 and subsequently went right into a drought. And the three managers in our basin at that time, we said, wow, we're never going to survive because we're putting a ton of money into these recharge projects, but if there's no water, they're not projects. They're just holes in the ground everywhere. Yeah. So we started talking about, everybody had it in the plan A was build a bunch of recharge projects, and plan B was demand management or allocations if you couldn't solve whatever you couldn't solve through projects, right? So if you're 100,000 acre feet short after you do all your projects, then you're going to have to cut 100,000 acre feet out of and do demand management. We realized that we were going to have to flip that conversation, and we had to lead with demand management and then supplement that demand management or minimize the demand management through projects. So the more projects you have, the more ground we can use for ag. Right at the same time, some growers came to me in 2021 and in the spring and said, Aaron, we're doing all this well work to our wells, and they're not even a handful of years old. These need to last us a generation from a business plan perspective, because I can't afford new wells every 10 years. That I'm just farming and all my revenue goes back into wells then. And we're just chasing each other down to the bottom. So at that point, the managers in the subbasin knew something had to change. The growers started to acknowledge that something had to be changed. We had a conversation in our board, and they said, Aaron, yeah, I think we better get a demand management system up and running. And the thing that then threw me for a loop, they go, you have 6 months to do it. And I go, I said, guys, we need to do it. 6 months. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you this much. That's why I love working in the Kaweah Subbasin. Although we were shocked, we started the process in July of 2021, and we locked the 3 managers and the 3 legal counsels. Every Friday we would get together and we drafted the skeleton of a allocation and demand management. And by October, we were ready to say, we think we need to do this and we can do it. And then what I did from there is I started working through my advisory committee, which is made up of all beneficial users of groundwater. So we have ag, disadvantaged communities, cities, industry. We have a representative from everybody. I started working with them on developing the allocation system, which we call an emergency ordinance, because under SGMA, you're allowed to implement ordinances or rules and regulations. So we opted for the emergency ordinance because we were in a drought. And during that time period, a couple growers came to me and said, Aaron, these growers are really upset you're doing this. So you better watch out. And it was a warning. You better watch out. I said, well, if they're gonna have heartburn over this, then they better tell me to my face. So I also have what I called affectionately the coffee shop committee. So it was a group of growers that are, longtime growers, very involved, very, thoughtful, very, they have a lot at risk. And I brought them in too. So I had a coffee shop committee and an advisory committee. And for the next 3 months, October, November, and December, we developed the program. So we had the skeleton by October, and then we put it all together by December. And when we presented it to the board said, we're gonna put this in place. And then from December to March, the next 3 months, I did outreach to the growers, had workshops, meetings, that sort of thing. And we implemented it in April of 2022. That allocation system is based on evapotranspiration. So we use the Land IQ model. We track ET every 30 days and then track surface water applied to that ground, rainfall applied to that ground, subtract that, and whatever's left has to be met with groundwater. And the first year, we used some historical numbers to set our allocation. It was 2.5 acre feet per acre. We know that on average, our crops use about 3 to 3.5 acre feet per acre. So in the first year, we agreed to reduce our allocation lower than what we know the average is. So we knew there had to be some ground that came out of production in order to meet that number. And we did. The first year, 2022, we saw a 13% reduction in evapotranspiration in 2022. So it worked. Currently, our current allocation has gone down even further, even in wet years. And now, instead of using historical numbers, what we're allocating is physically what water we put in the ground. So in 2023, we put about 200,000 acre feet in the ground. We chopped that up into blocks, and we're allocating that out over years. So our current allocation is about 1.83 acre feet per acre, I think, right now. So we're ramping down, and we're only allocating what we physically put in the ground, and it's less than what the average crop grows in the district. However, they can build credits, right? So they've built credits over time, and some of our growers have pretty large credits, like 3 or 4 acre-feet per acre, because what they've done is used a lot of surface water instead of groundwater. And then we did prop up a pilot market. That pilot market is probably going to be implemented next year, where growers can go through their water. We also have an online water dashboard tool that does all the tracking and allows growers to see their allocation and their credits and where they stand currently. And then it also will have the water market in it, so they can log in and transfer water to other landowners through a market process.
Um,
We acknowledge, and we went through about a 3-year process to set up our market, because
Yes.
markets are dangerous,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
We even heard from other markets throughout the US and in Australia and stuff. So we were very cognizant of some things that they went through that, they have doing it. Maybe it works for them, but we kind of were nervous. And the big one for us is that our market is not here for people to capitalize on the value of the water. Our market is set up so that, Ricardo, if you're my neighbor and you get into trouble, right, and you're short, and I have extra water, I want to help you out. And that's what our water market does. Our water market doesn't say corporate venture capitalist is going to come in and pour in a whole bunch of water and wait for us to go dry and then sell it to us at a high rate. So we actually don't allow outside investment in the water supply. You have to actually physically own the ground, and there's limits on how much you can transfer and limits on how much you can pump. So no venture capitalist is going to go invest in that, because there's limits. It's too constrained.
And from what you mentioned earlier, you have several hundred, maybe a couple thousand small farms, and you haven't been exposed to land consolidation as much as you've had in Tulare Lake Basin or in the Tulare Subbasin. But that has created a complete different dynamic in the ability of the GSA to want to do something like what you've done. And
Yeah.
I just wanted to make a little sidebar to mention that obviously you've done a lot of good things, because the January 2025 meeting with the Water Control Board has been canceled, with the staff recommending that Mid-Kaweah be offered more time to continue to work and finalize this GSP meeting their needs. And so that is a remarkable transformation. I find that very important, because it sends a very powerful message that yes, it can be done. And yes, the state is also looking at what you're doing and helping to get you there. Tell me a little bit more about that and how that felt.
No one will understand unless you were in our chairs. It was momentous, and from a manager's perspective that's been in the trenches with our growers trying to get this done, and it was emotional. It had built up to the point where we had so much vested in the success of our basin from a groundwater sustainability, but also our groundwater sustainability plan and the investment in getting the plan right, that the avoidance of a probation was exactly what we had been promoting to the state board their role was. And our conversation was, their role is either to build momentum, maintain momentum, or kill momentum.
Yes.
Right. And we're seeing all three of those with their actions. And in our basin, it's the maintain momentum and build in our basin. And so our growers have responded, directly to me that, Aaron, we had our fears and our doubts about the process. And I'll be very honest, some of them even told me, because they're honest with me, we had our fears and our doubts about you, Aaron. And could you get this done? Like, you're just one person. Like, how are you going to? And I said, no, I had a team behind me. Now that the growers are like, hey, they're smiling and they're going, you know what? let's go, let's do it. They're energized. They're ready for the next. What's the next thing, Aaron? What are we gonna do? You know, how do we get this thing going? And
Let
so
me
yeah,
ask you,
it's really worked.
wonderful. It's a really special experience that this is like a perfect storm in regards to the human elements, the demographics on the ground,
Yep.
that makes a big difference. The
Yeah.
farm population, who they are, what values they have, and I know this region fairly well as I worked and visited Orange Cove,
Oh yeah.
um, and that beautiful land that is by the foothills that is perfect for citrus, uh, and it's a small family mentality, and there's a lot of pride in being stewards of the land, and I think that that makes a huge difference in terms of the success
Yep.
of the GSAs moving forward and their ability to bring together what it needs to happen. But I wanted to bring you to this chart because this is, you're looking from 2023 to 2071.
Yep.
I will not be around to see it, but I want you to feel what it's like to flip the charts.
The way we get to sustainability in the Kaweah Subbasin is obviously you're seeing those months where we're going to bring in, under climate change and
Yes,
for those that look at climate change and believe in it, and we do, we're
yes,
going to see higher flows earlier in the year. So we're actually by volume going to see more water. People think you're going to see less water, but I think we're going to see more water. It's just you have to cap. It's not going to come as snow melt. It's not going to be water snowpack. It's going to be wet water,
yes,
and so what we're planning to do is to capture more of that through because now we have on-farm recharge. We have recharge basins. We're ready to go. They're everything's done. We
yes.
we can capture it. But the largest way we get to sustainability, Ricardo, is the reduction of demand. And we're looking to pull out upwards of 200,000 acre feet of average annual demand. So that's, upwards of 60 plus thousand acres of irrigated agriculture that's going to come out of production. Or, or it's like again, what I call smart fallowing. So it may lay off for a couple of years, and then when it's wet, you come back, and then you lay off and you come back. But that's the largest reduction. The rubber hits the road now, right? So yes, we have a GSP. Yeah, that was monumental. Sustainability is the goal. So
Yes.
7th, we're getting together and we're scoping out the year again, giving assignments out to our teams. We
And
are we are I like I told you, I'm biased, but I've never seen a group of people so committed to something. That's our success is the commitment. Yeah. So you have a great
thank you.
holiday, Ricardo, and
Thank
I'll
you.
see you at the PCL.
Thank you so much. I'll see you again, and I'll stop by.